he just really doesn't give a shit about how he comes off on screen, but he's trying to get at something that feels real.
Hello and welcome to MovieTown, the Los Angeles Revival Cinema Scene show. We are in Filipino Town today at 2220 Arts+Archives, and I'm joined by Artistic Director of Mezzanine, Micah Gottlieb. Micah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just wanted to jump right in because you guys have a really fantastic series this September about the French director Luc Moullet, the director that I'm really not familiar with. But reading about him in the films, I was like, oh, this both like personally, am really kind of into the sound of the films, but also just, kind of in this day and age to discover a director is so fun, and sort of what retrospectives I think can be, such kind of a pillar of the revival scene. And it's your first retrospective that Mezzanine's doing. I wondered how you landed on him, on this series, like, how did it all come together?
So Moullet was part of the original group of French New Wave filmmakers, obviously Jean-Luc Godard, François Truffaut, Eric Rohmer. But the important thing to remember about all these directors is that they were film critics before they became filmmakers. And that obviously informed a lot of their filmmaking practice afterward.
Were they writing for different publications originally, or did they all kind of come from one?
So the majority of them wrote for Cahiers du Cinéma, but there was also this rival publication called Positif, which I believe Rohmer wrote for Positif, and a number of other directors like Alain Resnais. There's this group of, there's this sort of parallel group of directors known as the Left Bank filmmakers, where you have like Agnes Varda, Alain Resnais, there's a few others I'm forgetting, but in a way, all these filmmakers are often grouped in more broadly as the French New Wave, but there were kind of political and social kind of divisions between them. I'm not going to get into all that now, but it is a really fascinating part of film history. But, all these filmmakers knew each other. They were either working together at these respective magazines, or they were friends or later rivals. And the interesting thing about Moullet is that he continued to write film criticism for the rest of his life. So he's still writing about movies, even recently, and he's alive. He's 88 years old. Yeah. So in a way, that kind of provides an inroad to his filmmaking, because Moullet is very much an anti-authoritarian spirit. He's also, in some ways, less of a theoretical stylist than some of the other directors. Like, the style of Godard when you see it. The style of Rohmer when you see it.
I mean, I think that's what got me excited, is just kind of like there seems to be an element of fun, mixed in with, the anti-authoritarianism, or like, Godard, like a lot of them, even just the images seem very, familiar in terms of Godard cinema, but like some of those, especially, when you get into the 80s Godard stuff, that's like very theoretical, almost essayist, like loses a little bit of that fun.
Sure.
I feel like.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, with Godard, it's also like you watch any of his movies and you sort of have a reading list of all the books and texts that he'd been reading that year while he was making it. And his movies are sort of like these open texts, where different works are kind of quoted and kind of speak to each other. So with Moullet, I mean, his earliest features are very much feel very similar to some of the 60s Godard films. I'm thinking of Brigitte and Brigitte, his first feature, The Smugglers, his second feature. And these films are both very fun and funny and absurdist, and are about young people who are, Brigitte and Brigitte are about two girls who are in college who have the same name but very different political affiliations.
And like the same look.
Yeah, the same look, exactly. And it's kind of, it's like one of them is left wing, one of them is right wing. It's the kind of movie that I almost wish somebody would steal and remake today, because it could be just have a whole different set of jokes and associations. The thing with Moullet is that even though his movies are often absurdist or kind of have an element of sociological critique, they're also very dryly funny. He really loves the gag. Like, you can tell that he's a fan of Jerry Lewis or Frank Tashlin, these kind of old Hollywood directors, who were both very much concerned with aesthetics and color, but also loved a good pratfall, loved great screwball dialogue scene. With Moullet, so the other element of him being a film critic is he was the first person to write seriously about B-movie auteurs like Samuel Fuller and Edgar Ulmer.
Okay.
And so that kind of B-movie spirit is sort of a through line through his work. So Moulet's cinema in general is very scrappy, very low budget. And he really is like a true kind of lifelong independent filmmaker.
Yeah.
He never, as far as I could tell, sold out. I mean, whatever that means. His movies, for the most part, are self-produced.
And he didn't really have one that became, like Godard and Truffaut did, kind of a hit across the Atlantic, right?
Yeah. I mean, his first movie to be distributed internationally was A Girl is a Gun, which the original French title is Une aventure de Billy le Kid. It's like a Billy the Kid story. Yeah. And that movie, it's kind of like his acid western, where, you have Jean-Pierre Léaud playing this like really cocky vagabond, Billy the Kid. And the movie is both very colorful and great to look at, but it's also, I feel like it almost exemplifies Moulet's sort of, I don't want to say lack of style, but it's like he kind of purposely, there's a sort of purposefully inept kind of feel to it that is very much intentional, but I think threw a lot of people off guard when the movie came out. And I think now people can appreciate kind of what he was trying to do in terms of responding to, what was then kind of the culture of spaghetti westerns that were doing extremely well at the box office, but also wanting to infuse it with this really wry sensibility. And so, I mean, I think too, what really attracts me to French cinema and to this period of French cinema is that I feel like the French New Wave, in a way, is like, these are all the different paths forward for art house cinema. And in some, how the way that each of these directors just pioneered their own filmmaking style, some of which, carried on to tradition, and some of which almost feel like roads not taken. Or, people like Jacques Rivette, who makes these incredible, at least, to me, I love Rivette, but these kind of very theatrical, conspiratorial, epic movies that are, it's 3 hours long and you don't know what's real and what isn't. And it's like, you kind of turn into a paranoid freak while watching them to figure out what's happening. And so, and he mastered that. And that's something that, there are some movies that have been made since then where you can see that through line, but he really he was able to carve out that space for himself. And so I feel like, there's just this, especially now, I think that we live in a sort of what sometimes feels like a monoculture of movies, which we can talk a bit about later. But I feel like, part of the joy for me of being a programmer is to sort of try to help other people be curious about these sort of roads not taken in cinema. And I think that in independent film, because the stakes are much lower, you have, both are cheaper, and they're often movies made with friends or less resources. You are able to see more risks in terms of storytelling, in terms of aesthetics. And to me, I kind of see all these things as sort of in a through line or in a tradition.
And then like as a programmer, when you take on, especially this is your first retrospective series you're doing, like how did you approach it? As did you bring it down to like how much did you put into the order of the films? Like, because you guys are starting with Anatomy of a Relationship, which is not his first feature. His first feature, Brigitte and Brigitte, which we talked a little bit about, but because a lot of series, it's like, well, do you go in order?
Right.
Like, how do you, because I think that's one of the fun things for people to approach it is like, well, I want to see, if I like this guy's films, then maybe I'll see all, maybe I'll see like, as many as I can, or whatever. So the first film feels like a big kind of choice or whatever. Did it feel like that when you guys were doing this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I knew that that was the film to open the series with, partly because I think that's sort of that's Moulet's most accessible film, all told. It's a movie. First of all, it was the first movie where he plays a version of himself. He puts himself in the movie, which is something that he did many times for the rest of his career, whether in his documentaries or his narrative films.
And would he be playing a version? Because I know in this one he plays a film director.
Yes.
Was he always playing kind of a film critic or director?
So a lot of his films, he sort of, in a way, he'll make like a Hitchcock type of cameo, where he'll sort of participate in the action of whatever he's performing. I'm thinking of, there's this film called Bares, which is a short film, which is, I think, one of his best movies, which is about the culture of turnstile hoppers in Parisian subways. And so, of course, he puts himself, he's one of the, 24 people that hops the subway turnstile in that short film. In this film, so he plays a version of himself, perhaps in some ways the most autobiographical film that he's made, and it kind of prefigures this, sort of trend of, what people now call autofiction, but it's sort of, like self-reflexive documentary or narrative filmmaking. So, you think of movies like David Holtzman's Diary by Jim McBride, or later people like Ed Pincus or Kaveh Zahedi, people who put the camera on themselves and make these kind of diaristic documentaries or movies where, reality and fiction are pretty intertwined. So in this movie,
did he co-direct this or just co-write it with his
So he co-directed it. He co-directed it with his real-life partner, who doesn't play herself in the movie, but she does appear later in the movie, and I don't want to spoil anything. But this film, to me, is it really kind of exemplifies Moulet's dry wit, and also his kind of frankness when it comes to, relationships, whether it's sex, or, talking about what it's like to be an independent filmmaker. I mean, there's scenes of him on the phone where he's talking to, a financier, a producer, trying to get money for his movie. In the movie, there's a big poster for this Marguerite Duras movie called Natalie Granger, which we actually showed with Mezzanine a few years ago. And Moullet was a producer on that film. So it's one of those things that you might not know just by watching the film itself, but there's all these little nods to kind of his real filmmaking career. But the movie is just, it's also a movie about impotence, and being able to sexually satisfy your girlfriend. And so that's also something where, it's just, it's these tropes that I feel like have become so constant in filmmaking, particularly filmmaking by men who are sort of depicting their romantic life and their foibles, and also trying to be taken seriously as artists. And so it's to me, that movie is kind of ahead of its time, but also kind of disarmingly honest, and sort of shows you, how he just really doesn't give a shit about how he comes off on screen, but he's trying to get at something that feels real. And I also think that Moullet, more broadly, I mean, he's made great feature films, but he's also an incredible short filmmaker. And, he has like 36 shorts. We were not able to include them all in this retrospective. But what we tried to do was to pair each of the features with a short film that was somehow thematically related, or to my mind, made a good pairing. So for Anatomy of Relationship, we paired it with a short film called Essai d'ouverture, which means trying to open, which is sort of a perfect opening night movie. And it's a 12-minute short film where Moullet is trying to open a Coke bottle, and he depicts, it's again like this kind of comedic series of gags where he uses a blowtorch, he uses a hammer. It's all these different methods of how do you open a Coke bottle. And it also, in some ways, kind of a signature Moullet film, because it's a series of gags. It's almost kind of like a how-to.
Is he the one trying to open it?
Yes.
And what was your entry point for him?
For me?
Yeah. And how long ago was it? Do you remember?
Yeah. So I think the first time I had seen a Luc Moullet film was around 10 years ago. I watched his film Le Siège de l'Alcazar, or The Seats of the Alcazar, which is an hour-long film. It's medium length. Because of its length, it's not often screened. It's also never been restored. But this movie, it's really beloved by sort of hardcore cinephiles, like French cinephiles, because it's a movie about cinephilia, specifically Parisian cinephile culture. It's a movie about a movie theater called the ALCAZAR in Paris, where a number of film critics and cinephiles gather.
Is it a nonfiction? Or
no, this one's a fiction film, but all the characters feel like they're based on real people. So these characters are, so the movie follows a male film critic who writes for Cahiers du Cinéma, who's going to this retrospective of this filmmaker, Vittorio Cottofavi, who is actually a real director, is all but unknown, but is exactly the kind of director that the Cahiers du Cinéma crowd would try to valorize or make a case for. And, so he goes to this retrospective and he's planning to write this piece on it. And he sees this rival film critic, this woman who works for Positif, who's also at every screening with him. And so the movie is kind of a depiction of, how the kind of pettiness and absurdity of kind of hardcore cinephile culture.
A clip of this one online when I was pulling stuff up. I can picture the look across the theater between the critics and this one I found is really fun.
Exactly.
Did finding this film, did it set you off? Oh, I got to watch more films from Moullet?
It did. It was also, I think that for me, I've been so lucky to have spent most of my life living in LA and New York, where in New York, if there's a film that you really want to see that is not readily available on streaming, chances are it will come around at one of the many great film repertory film institutions there. And I was able to catch a handful of Moulet's films when I was living in New York at Anthology Film Archives. I would catch a few of his short films as part of a thematic shorts program that they put on there. He has a great short called The Belly of America, which we've included in this series that I remember extremely well, and I'm excited for people to see it. But the only ones that I had, the features that I had seen prior were The Seats of the Alcazar, A Girl is a Gun, and Anatomy of Relationship. So I had not seen I had not seen a lot of his films before deciding to do this retrospective, but in a way, this is how I really feel in general with Mezzanine. Something that I'm trying to work against is I think that, for people who are just getting into movies or are sort of aware of the culture of cinephilia, I think people sometimes feel a little intimidated by the sort of connoisseurship of people who've seen so many, probably too many movies, and they don't know where to start. And I really think that, part of what we're trying to do with Mezzanine is both to show things that have either never shown in LA before or don't show here often, to do them as often as possible in collaboration with other organizations or people from other disciplines, but also to provide context around these movies and in a way to sort of say, yes, these are art house films that are little seen, but they're also accessible to everybody. And it's partly why we always write our own program notes. We always, we try to bring people in essentially, because I think that that's what people really respond to now is they like to feel that something is curated, and also that they won't feel stupid if they come and they don't get it or if they don't understand what this is. So I think that, I don't know if I would call it an educational initiative per se, but I do think that that's sort of our job as programmers to both shine a light on things that are not often shown, but also to sort of translate them in a way that hopefully doesn't dilute the original work, but also can bring more people in than not. So, I'm speaking as somebody who used to be a really precocious cinephile, would go to the theater. I got a lot of free tickets in New York because I used to work the box office at a movie theater. So, I've been that young, snotty cinephile. And I think as I've gotten older, especially now, post-COVID and post-Letterboxd, you have so many young people who are really eager to discover new films that are new to them, whether they're new movies or old movies, and they want to go out and experience them with other people. So, I think that I think the more that you can sort of, again, and I guess all that is to say that it doesn't matter if you haven't seen everything or haven't seen most things. What's important is that you create an environment that is both cool and accessible for as many people as you can.
And so with the Moullet, I mean, I think obviously we talked about Anatomy of a Relationship in the Essai des Ouvertures as kind of like, that's a little bit almost you saying, this is where I want you all to start this. Like, is there another night that, I know it's hard to choose when you have like, you're showing all these features and the short blocks to say, well, this is, the one really to see, but is there another night that really jumps out besides the opening night, like a pairing of feature and short that just feels like, oh, okay, this is another, like, because most people aren't going to come see everything, but if they're to like try to pinpoint what's their center point in the series.
Sure. I mean, I would definitely recommend that folks come to one of our 2 double features. Really, because Moullet has so many films and we wanted to be able to fit in as much as we could over the span of a month, we made double features of both his first 2 films, Brigitte and The Smugglers, and The Seats of the Alcazar with Death's Glamour.
Okay.
And so the first 2 films, I think, again, anybody who's a fan of 1960s French New Wave films, I think these are must-sees. I especially think The Smugglers is just a really gorgeous movie. The entire thing, it feels like a landscape comedy, I would say, just because almost every shot is just incredible shots of the mountain range and the desert. It's it's about these smugglers who are kind of in a love triangle with each other. It's wonderful. The restoration looks beautiful,
and those are both kind of like brisk, Brigitte's 76 minutes to The Smugglers 80 minutes.
Yes,
it's kind of like I mean, I like that kind of double feature a lot when you're not like when you're don't know the filmmaker necessarily as well.
Exactly. That was totally deliberate. I think that, we love a good 75, 80-minute movie. And so we're really happy to be able to show, 2 for the price of 1.
Yeah.
And then with the other double feature, so those are the 2 films of Moullet that are really dealing with cinephilia more squarely. And I think, with Death's Glamour, which Moullet is in, I think that, people are really going to, that's a movie that just does not screen very often.
Okay.
And I think the 2 films work really well.
Was that, has he made that many late career movies, or was that one of the last films he made?
It's one of the last one. I think the last film he made. So, and to be clear, this isn't a complete retrospective. So there are 2 or 3 features that I ultimately decided we didn't need to show unless there's like a huge groundswell of support. Or if people are really itching for more Moullet after September, I can try to make it happen. But we really wanted to, boil this down to, the films that he's best known for that kind of exemplify his range. I mean, another example is, he has this film called Origins of a Meal, which is his first full-length documentary, which is a movie about, basically about the industrial capitalism around the food industry. And it's also a movie that, talks about issues that are still incredibly relevant and, and also kind of put him on the map as, he is in some ways a very political filmmaker, but also, somebody who is really concerned with what's going on in the world right now.
Right. And it sounds like even, you do think a lot of in the new wave, like you said, the left playing like very politically kind of front and center often. These sound like they're a little bit, he never, I think what attracts me is it sounds like he never kind of loses sight of that they're really, kind of comedy of life kind of stuff, in addition to, well, this is kind of, happening in the background or,
Totally.
It's like the messaging of it isn't, thrown at you constantly.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, he often narrates his documentaries, and you'll get to know his sort of cadence. He has this kind of he almost sounds a little bit pedantic, but I think it's part of his dry humor. And one of the reasons that he sort of reminds me of John Wilson is that, they both have these kind of unmistakable voices, literal voices as they're narrating. But like John Wilson, Luc Moullet is not shy enough to, have a funny cutaway or some kind of gag, whether he's made multiple films about the supermarkets in France. And so, he'll have a shot of somebody letting a shopping cart, cruise across the parking lot. And I think, like John Wilson, who has, a ton of great B-roll. I mean, his stuff is just, it's both, great in terms of the subject and perspective, but also just all the cutaways of things happening that most people might not notice when they're walking down the street. I feel like that spirit of this kind of, again, sort of diaristic documentary filmmaking that's sort of couched within this, larger argument that is, again, just trying to call your attention to just how absurd it is to live in a city or live in the country,
So this series, another kind of interesting thing is, I think I'm used to being here at 2220 Arts and Archives when I've seen mezzanine screenings, or it definitely feels like kind of your home base. But this one, you also have a few nights at Brain Dead Studios. And so how does that even come about, or, how are you attached to 2220, or, what is that?
Yeah. So we've been incredibly lucky to spark these organic relationships with these venues in LA, particularly venues that have cropped up or become more popular after the pandemic occurred. As the pandemic was fading, I started to do pop-up screenings around town for Mezzanine. I was also volunteering with Acropolis Cinema, which is another great series that focuses on international art house cinema. And I had done several screenings, including a screening of James Benning's 10 Skies. James Benning is a great California experimental filmmaker. And there had just been this new monograph on the film by this great writer, Erica Balsam. And it seemed like, this is a great opportunity to both celebrate this book release and show this film again. And Benning, who lives in LA, could come. So we did a screening of that at the comedy club Dynasty Typewriter, which is a comedy venue, but we were able to bring in portable 16mm projectors. We advertised it online a month in advance. And this was a time, I want to say this was like June of 2021. So it was kind of when the mask mandate was starting to come down. People were still masked, but theaters could at least be half full. So we did the screening. It sold out. It was wonderful. And it was clear that people were really hungry to get back to the movies again. And that was when I met Andrew Maxwell, who is one of the owners of 2220 Arts and Archives. And he said, I'm opening this new space, the old Bootleg Theater in Filipino Town. I would love for you guys to do screenings here. So that was sort of our in. And basically I had gone to UCLA to get my master's degree in library and information science, and I had written a thesis about the landscape of alternative moving image exhibition in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay, wow.
So the idea...
When was that? When did you write that? Like what period?
So I wrote it during COVID.
Okay.
So I started it before COVID, and then once COVID happened, it kind of changed the tenor of the whole thing. But the idea was to sort of ask this question, what is it that makes Los Angeles's movie-going landscape unique, and why is it so different from places like New York or Paris or other kind of centers of cinephilia? Because after all, Los Angeles, this is where Hollywood is. This is the commercial film industry's home. And
that's one of the things I think I even, that got me starting this show was I've been in LA over 20 years, been going, so a lot of that was keeping up with kind of the revival repertory scene, whether it's the New Beverly or American Cinematheque. And then, Cinefamily had a great run like in the 2010s kind of, and I think changed a little bit the culture of what revival moviegoing could be, added a little bit more of a fun element to it. And then it does feel like, and I'm interested for your take on it, is like COVID, because theaters shut down, the ArcLight shut down, there was kind of this wellspring of smaller stuff popping up, whether it's micro cinemas, BRIGITTE and the Vista have opened on the East Side, that it feels like a different period of like LA revival art house movie going, to where it's a lot more robust, and like the screenings are so crowded when I go out to these. I'm just wondering, like, what have you seen, or do you read it kind of that way as well?
Absolutely. I think it's incredible, the amount of initiatives and micro cinemas and itinerant series and venues that have cropped up since COVID is amazing. Yeah, I mean, to piggyback what I was saying before, so, I think LA is a really unique landscape in part because it's such a big city, and, things are so spread out. And I think that the other element of LA is that, this is obviously where Hollywood is based. And I think that anything that is sort of alternative to Hollywood or, celebrity film culture naturally has a harder time gaining attention. I think, over the last 20, even 40, 50 years, there have been any number of cinemas or initiatives or series that have cropped up and done incredible work, but were not ultimately able to sustain themselves. And so I think that what happened is that after COVID, people started to realize, we need to kind of rethink this whole thing, and not just rely on the established institutions to show all the stuff that we want to show. I think that especially what's happened is, east of Hollywood, there have been all of these new venues, whether it's BRIGITTE, whether it's 2220 Arts, whether it's now Instant, also the Los Feliz 3 now does full-time repertory. And so I think that and again, a lot of these institutions either existed or were being born before COVID, but I think that they all really seized on the fact that there is this younger, more diverse, hungry audience on this part of town that, want to go out and see interesting stuff. And I think also, we live in a time where, as I said, sort of the monoculture of Hollywood is, let's just put it out there. I think American cinema is maybe worse than it's ever been in my lifetime, in terms of the kinds of things that Hollywood's putting out. There's very few good movies made for adults anymore in theaters.
And do you think that's part of the reason why people are looking back so much, like now in LA?
I think so. I mean, I think, not to go off on a diatribe about why Hollywood is the way it is now, but I do think that, there was this big push to get people on streaming, and then people start to realize, okay, they're streaming, there are hardly any old movies on there, and everything that's new, for the most part, is not very good. And so, so what happens to that, I hesitate to call it a tradition of quality, but, what happened to the sort of mid-budget movie made for adults, you know? So I think that people are responding to this sort of increasingly fragmented atmosphere we live in, where, we both in theory, have access to more content, I hate to say, than ever at home, but there's also we have access to more things to watch at home, but there just isn't that much that's playing new in theaters that people are excited about. So I think that revival theaters and art houses have responded to this by, ideally cultivating a better atmosphere around movie going. And I also just want to add that, something that I think is important for us is that everywhere we do screenings, it's important for us to have a common space or a social area. Here at 2220, we have a bar that's open before, during
I think that's one of the things that's made like coming here that I've liked so much, because I used to come to, I came to a number of music shows right here when it was the Bootleg, and of course the theater is right behind us here, but I love showing up here, and there's always people, having some drinks before the screening, and then you walk out and you have this space afterwards. And I think that's one of the things that's, you even hit on, of just going to the movies, going to these screenings is so much more enjoyable than say going just to the AMC, and it feels both so kind of mechanical and anonymous.
Right.
You know, and here it's like, yeah, you could still come to a movie alone here and you might strike up a conversation, or even if not, you just feel like more a part of this,
right,
you know, kind of LA cinema scene.
Exactly. And I think for us, it was, you know, I mean, speaking personally, I wanted to try and build a community of people who I feel I have a kinship with, whether it's in terms of taste or moreover in terms of curiosity. You know, I think that it's also important to recognize that I think, you know, before and after COVID, you're seeing, you know, with all the challenges that independent and mainstream movie theaters faced, I think we're really seeing how important it is to properly market these events that are happening. And, you know, not to speak about marketing in this corporate way, but I think that, you know, there are movie theater chains that show good movies, but they don't use social media at all.
Yeah.
They haven't thought about how to reach an audience that's younger than what used to be the core art house movie-going audience, which, you know, is people age 60 plus who used to go see every movie that Kenneth Turan would give a good review in the LA Times every Friday. They don't go to the movies anymore. Whether it's because they have been conditioned to think that everything will come on streaming in a month or less, or, you know, because they just don't want to be in a crowd full of people for health reasons.
Right.
So I think that to me is sort of at the core of the crisis around movie going right now. I think that, you know, and I think as well, I mean, this could also bring us to our conversation about our film festival, which is that, you know, at a certain point, so Mezzanine originally started as a revival film series.
Yeah.
And then we started to do one-off screenings of new independent films by filmmakers who we admired, who felt, you know, that when their movie plays in LA, they have a hard time getting anyone to come out and see it. And I think that in a way that's true, because I think as great as rep cinema is now in LA, I think that new independent art house films still have a hard time finding an audience here. And I think that, you know, part of that is because, you know, again, the LA Times, you know, they cover repertory, they cover a lot of the new releases, but I think that, you know, there's not, I mean, part of it is globally, there's just, you know, the media industry is in crisis, but there, you know, is not currently, you know, other than, I mean, okay, so there's always exceptions to everything, but I think that there's no centralized hub for new independent films and revival movies. And so, you know, so I think that so there is sort of a crisis of marketing around new independent and art house films here. And so we started.
When did you get like with the LA Festival of Movies, when did that start at the same time, you know, in 2021, like the idea of it? No. Or did it come like after you'd been doing screenings for a little bit?
It came after. So I started to do these one-off screenings of new independent films that were also performing extremely well or selling out. And I met this producer named Sarah Winshaw, who came to one of our screenings, and we talked afterward, and we both bonded over this feeling that, you know, she was like, the kinds of movies that she produces, she doesn't know where she would go see them in LA. And so, you know, we got to talking, and we also realized that LA did not currently have a independent film festival that is devoted to new independent and art house films that isn't oriented around award season or campaigning, and also that isn't just oriented around genre cinema. So we felt, okay, LA has plenty of, you know, Oscar qualifying platforms. LA has plenty of, you know, core film festivals. But what about a festival that's just about great new independent films that are just great movies and that maybe have played at other major festivals, and if they come here, no one knows about them. So we wanted to, you know, and we thought, okay, why don't we try to do this in the spring after Sundance, after Rotterdam and Toronto, and to do it during a period when, again, you know, there's sort of a clean slate where people are not necessarily.
And 2025 was the second year?
So yes, so the festival began in April of 2024.
Got it.
And we launched our first fundraising campaign in late 2023. That was also when Mezzanine became a nonprofit, because we foresaw that, okay, we want to turn this into a good cause and to raise money. And, we were also responding to just anecdotally things that we would hear from filmmakers who live here or who visiting town and feeling like, and also if you look at articles that were written even 10, 15 years ago, there's this prevailing idea that LA is an art house film desert. There's this article in the LA Times from 10 years ago, it's worth reading, talking about, why is it that distributors don't like to open their movies here? And I think that, not to say that this is the only answer, but I think that there really is just, I think Hollywood just kind of drowns everything out. And I think that what we need to do is to show that LA is a city with a vital film culture that isn't necessarily tied to these kind of broader things, whether we're going to awards or what Hollywood is putting out. I mean, I think that there's so many people here who live and work in the industry or trying to make their own stuff, and they want a space to be with each other and, so in
2026, what are you guys, are you going to kind of take the success of 2025 and sort of try to repeat it, or is it, you want to expand a little bit? Like where are you at now with like the third version?
So we are currently planning our fundraising campaign, which we're going to launch in a few weeks. I think for us, we recognize that what the strengths of our festival are related to the fact that it is small, but it's also genuinely curated and intentional. We think that people respond well to the fact that everything we do at the festival is something that we can stand behind. We've seen every film, we love every film, we love every filmmaker, and we want to be able to do the best job we can without expanding too quickly. And I think we've seen a lot of major film organizations, nonprofits, take hits in recent years, in part because of this kind of willingness to expand too quickly. And so I think for us, because we're still new and we're still fresh in people's minds, we really just want to, at best, increase awareness of what it is we're trying to do, to let filmmakers know that we are a good home for a good first home for their films here in LA, and also to figure out
potentially have a little bit of more of an element of discovery type fest than films that are coming from Rotterdam or Locarno or that element, or you just balance it a little bit?
We try. So we try to do an even split between both regional American exactly. So our festival as it stands is both a combination of regional American independent films and international art house films, as well as revivals and artist talks, etc. And because we're still relatively, we're 4-day festival, I think that ultimately, yes, we do want to have more discoveries, more world premieres, but I think for us, we would rather take a film that world premiered at Rotterdam that we think is a great movie, and do the LA or West Coast premiere of that, then world premiere a film that we think is just okay, So I think for us, because we're new and we're relatively small, and we answer to ourselves ultimately, which is also how I think about Mezzanine, where I feel very lucky to be able to program things that I actually like, and to be able to build trust with our audience that we're not wasting their time. You know what I mean? So I think with the festival,
this gets at, not to jump totally away from the fest, but it just reminded me of something I wanted to make sure is like when you were saying stuff, your own film tastes and stuff that you could really stand behind. I'm interested, what was kind of is there a certain movie or director that kind of flipped the switch for you into being a cinephile? Can you think back on it?
It's a good question. It's kind of like when people ask you, what's your favorite movie of all time? It's like a different answer depending on who I'm talking to. But since, you probably have a pretty informed audience, I mean, I was a very precocious cinephile. I was very lucky that my dad would take me to see both new Hollywood and new art house films every week. We grew up going to the Laemmle Sunset 5, which is now a Landmark Theater.
Yeah.
But that was the theater where, all the new acclaimed.
Yeah, no, that was one of my main art houses when I moved to LA. Was Sunset 5.
Exactly. Like I remember, going to see Last Days, the Gus Van Sant movie there with my dad, which I loved. I saw The Devil and Daniel Johnston. I mean, I saw a lot of just movies that really kind of imprinted themselves onto me. But in terms of movies that really kind of like got into my bloodstream, so, like a lot of independent film figures, I really love the films of John Cassavetes.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, my parents got me as a gift that, Criterion 5 films.
That was it. My mom got me randomly, not randomly, it was a random gift coming from my mom, but she had gone to like a Barnes and Noble and asked, because they had the video section there. My son really, is a big movie fan. Like, what should I get him? And this guy there like pulled out that set and was like, this. And it's such a seminal set for me too.
Yeah, those movies are incredible, partly because I think they were the first movies I watched where I felt like I really recognized the people on screen. It felt like, okay, feel like flesh and blood human beings, or at least people who are bringing a lot of their real life traumas, feelings, joy.
Do you have a favorite of his, you think?
I mean, I love almost all of them, but my personal favorite has to be The Killing of a Chinese Mickey. Yeah.
I think that's partly because that was the one that like I saw that both felt different from some of the other stuff. I think I saw A Woman Under the Influence first and loved it, but seeing that one I was like, oh wow, this is something just feels really different.
It's a masterpiece. I mean, I think I read something really interesting about that movie recently, about how it was the point in Cassavetes' career when he went from being more interested in realism into something approaching expressionism.
Yeah.
And, I think that's sort of in reference to the fact that, the movie, in some ways the shots feel more composed, there's more dynamic lighting, there's sequences that feel kind of more surrealistic. It's also, a genre film technically. But for me, it's kind of the ultimate movie about being a filmmaker, being an aficionado, being something of a showman,
right.
I think. The fact that, the main character is somebody who, runs a strip club where, they do these, in some ways, very silly performances on the theater stage that are not sexy, but are, everyone is clearly having a great time. The leader of the band is in Mr. Sophistication, right. which is incredible. And so, to me, that movie, it's a movie about somebody who goes through life, not in a straight line. I mean, he's always kind of fucking up. He's making mistakes. He takes a bad bet. But he really believes in himself and believes in what he's doing, no matter how imperfect or rough around the edges it is. And he's willing to risk his life for this project that he's put together with people he loves and people he feels fond about. It's about that. It's about masculinity. It's about a lot of things. But to me, it's just it is kind of an incredible like self-portrait of Cassavetes, but also a great LA movie. It's totally a portrait of bygone LA, incredible location shooting. But I think moreover, with Cassavetes, I mean, you watch his movies and you feel like, okay, these are movies made by a group of friends or a group of people who are all kind of, in on a secret with each other, and they're kind of sharing bits of that secret with you in the form of these movies. And I think that I'm always really drawn to movies that shine a light on a kind of strange community and feel like you're sort of peering into a private world in a way that feels very, not like exploitative per se, but that feels just really kind of opens your mind. And that's an experience that I really cherish. So that's a movie that I've come back to a lot, and I rewatch all of his movies probably every like 6 or 7 years. So
Well, Micah, thanks so much for taking the time. I
Yeah.
can't wait to get out to the Moullet series and whatever else Mezzanine's got in store for the rest of this year and next.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking an interest and inviting me on.
Thank you.